So consider the following. You're autistic and you're in 5th grade and you're in public education, and the year is, what would the year be? Around 2012, 2011, something like that. And you're offered a pamphlet called Superflex. It's disguised as a comic book, but it's not really a comic book. It's badly written propaganda designed to cue you into the possibilities of flexible thought. Now, this was a scenario I was in 5th grade. I was offered this comic book in quotations, because it doesn't have any of the tact or depth or nuance that the average comic book does. I think, in fact, that Superflex is one of the worst comic books of all time. You can look it up online. I'm not sure if it's taught in mainstream curriculum anymore. But Superflex, in effect, was this cartoon, this superhero who had flexible thought and encouraged flexible thought. So the idea was to autistic people, well, you have these rigid expectations of reality. You have very, very stringent standards and ideas about how reality should be, how the world should be, how it should work and all. And Superflex comes along, and his role is essentially to tell you, well, your perception of reality is stupid. You should just accept whatever the world hands you. Your thought should be flexible. You should be adaptable. You should be open to change. And I think this was a very bad comic book to give to young autistic people. Like I say, I don't know if it's in common use anymore. I'm sure there are still a couple schools that have copies of it lying around, along with a lot of other disproven psychological stuff. But Superflex, when you get right down to it, not only is the core idea behind the series stupid, like if its message is to get through to autistic people, your thought is rigid, that should change. The basic premise of the series, the core concept of Superflex, is fundamentally bad. Superflex as a character fucking sucks. A superhero, out of any type character, I mean, if you have, a morally gray character, or Tyler Durden or whatever, then, they can have flexible thought, they can adapt, whatever. But a superhero should have very rigid standards of morality that they adhere to. A superhero should give a shit. A superhero should care about things, worry about things, be invested, generally. Now, this is how Superman is. Superman says, there's a group of racketeers threatening Metropolis, right? This was the plot of a lot of the Superman stories of the late 30s, early 40s. There's gangsters, or there's not gangsters, say there's a corrupt politician or a union buster, Say there's a boss that threatens a union, right? I myself have been involved in a scenario where there was a union and just an absolute bastard of an employer that made life shit for that union. So superheroes should have standards, morals to uphold, right? And Superflex didn't. Superflex was a character that just didn't give a shit. Superflex was like, well, there's this vile supervillain threatening everyone. He's taking hostages, he robs banks, etc. But see, the catch of the Superflex stories was that none of the villains were really villains in the traditional sense. They didn't do things that people in the real world can do, like union bust or racketeer or be corrupt. They were more like abstract manifestations of rigid thought. I remember in particular there was one called the Destroyer of Fun that was like basketball that was punctured. And so the idea was when you have rigid thought, you can't play a game of basketball because it's a cooperative sport, and you need to have flexible thought to play a fun game of basketball with your friends. And that's something you can't do if you have rigid thought. So Superflex would be like, oh, you're the destroyer of fun. You destroy the fun basketball game. What this book failed to take into account is that being autistic, in 5th grade I didn't have any friends to play a fun game of basketball with. I didn't have, I didn't have one friend, let alone 3, 2, that I can play an entire pickup game with. And I didn't even find sports fun. What I found fun was drawing comics alone, by myself, completely alone. That was what I found to be a real good time. I didn't find basketball fun at all. So this villain is completely irrelevant to my existence. It's just a shit villain all around. I forget exactly how Superflex would solve conflicts, but he doesn't seem like the type who would be able to solve conflicts, because if his thought is completely flexible, and he's completely adaptable, then any villain you put him up against, he would just say, oh, well, I guess maybe this villain has a point. Maybe everything is just subjective, and there's no baseline standard of morality that we should adhere to, and maybe this villain just has a point. So he's like a complete pushover. He sucks as a superhero. As a superhero, Superflex is the worst possible fucking superhero. Like, if you have Batman, and he's like, oh, Joker, you need to stop killing people, you need to stop, hijacking trains and shit, and Joker's like, but Batman, the world is chaos, and, Batman wouldn't buy into that. Batman has standards, morals, ethics, but Superflex would just be like, oh, yeah, Joker, you kind of have a point there, maybe you've got something going for you, Joker. This guy, ideas, right? Superhero fucking sucks. A Superflex was a terrible idea for a superhero. I'm not sure why, out of all the ideas that could have gone with, in terms of trying to talk to autistic people about rigid thought, it was like a superhero story where, there's very well-defined concepts of good versus evil that, you kind of have to have for a compelling superhero story to happen. But I think it was to trick kids into reading this bad psychology shit that's like, having standards is stupid. Be a massive fucking sellout with no integrity, right? And this was the idea behind the Superflex books. You can say that's not what they were about. I don't know if there's any big Superflex fans watching this video, but down in the comments, let me know. Do you like Superflex? Do you remember Superflex? Was he a big inspiration? Is he your favorite superhero? I don't know. Is he? Anyway, this idea was fucking stupid. In 2024, shortly after the election, I got a comment on one of my videos telling me that my existence was just the result of a deficit. That the only reason I'm able to exist, as an autistic person obviously, because the person who left this comment was a very thinly veiled eugenicist, the only reason I'm able to exist is because of America's massive debt, or something along those lines. I don't buy into that at all, but if anyone is the result of a deficit, it is fascists. And if anyone is going to die soon, it is fascists. Fascists will be the ones to die. When you get right down to it, another trait that defines fascism on a core level is the inability to accept the inevitability of death. You can't accept that you're going to die. You believe that your ideas are the one universal truth. And that's just not the case. But I have to say, I've been weathering it out pretty good. And fascists don't seem to be. And I think they'll die a lot sooner than I will. It provides me with a great deal of comfort. Right now, as I speak, the United States Army is being trained on the idea that their goal is to bring about the end times and Jesus' return. Well, newsflash, when the war is over, if there is a war, Jesus won't return, because Jesus was a fucking loser who died 2,000 years ago and is irrelevant to the modern world. And at the end of the day, we can't blame the behavior of human beings on deities like Jesus or the devil or the Antichrist. We're the only people doing anything. We're responsible for what we do. That's a rigid thought I have that I think helps me. Recently, I've been thinking about just how good it is that I have rigid thought, that I adhere to a predictable routine, and that my thought isn't as flexible as that of other people. I think that's actually really good for me, and I'm enduring this period of time much better than other people are. Every allosexual man around me, none of them serve as a good example to, like, here's, I'll be a role model for you, I'll show you how to do things, I'll provide you with opportunities, possibilities forward. Allosexual men don't really seem capable of that anymore. It's just constant insecurity, constant, oh, the world is shit, I don't know what to do, the world is sad, oh, I'm spiraling into depression. And that's what flexible thought will get you. Or supposedly flexible thought, because as it turns out, like, people buy into rigid, restraining ideas all the time without even recognizing it. Things like being employed is objectively good, having sex is objectively good, having children is objectively good. And these are very rigid, constraining thoughts that you go your entire life through without even questioning them once, without thinking about them or considering where they come from. And you don't process them. And that's rigid thought. Like, you're not open to new ideas, new possibilities. But people with ideas like that have the gall to tell me that my thought is rigid just because I'm convinced that I'll never have sex or a job. I'm pretty convinced that I'm not going to have either of those things during my lifetime. I won't be employed, and I won't be having sex with anyone. I'm convinced of those two things, like, basically 100%. If anyone wants to try and convince me otherwise, they can either justify sex, why it's a good thing, why it needs to happen, who gives a shit, why I need to reproduce, I don't give a fuck, or provide me with a job opportunity that's so good and appealing and would provide me with such a substantial benefit in life, such a whopping just improvement that I couldn't possibly resist it. Neither of those two things is going to happen anytime soon. So, those are rigid thoughts I have, but they're just different rigid thoughts than everyone else has. It's very difficult for people to modify their thoughts. People are generally inflexible. People have certain ideas about the way things work, and it's hard to get people to change their mind on things. And I think that's just kind of human nature, not just for autistic people, for anyone. People have expectations about the way that reality should be. People try to mold reality to their expectations, and that's fine. That's just basic human nature at work. It just so happens that my expectations about how my existence will go are sort of different. And that's okay, because that's actual diversity. But I will say this. Fascists... This is an effective illustration of a fascist mind. All the wires are there, but they don't work. They're all disconnected. They're not doing anything. Fascism will kill you if you buy into it. Fascism has no place in a civilized world, and it's of no use to anyone. Take this and fuck it, Elon Musk. This is your mind. Alright, sorry about the cut, but some little toddler walked up onto the pier here with her mom, and I didn't want to disturb them with my anti-fascist death screed. But suffice to say, fascists have the most rigid thought possible. Fascism is defined by rigid inflexibility, and it's the wrong kind of rigid thought. It's not the kind of rigid thought that says, I'm going to draw comics because that's what I like doing. It's the kind of rigid thought that says, the entire world needs to bow to my perception of reality, and I'm going to reshape reality with my immense power and resources until people accept it as reality. But see, this is where my rigid thought comes in as a benefit, because no matter how much fascists try to redefine reality, I can't redefine it. I can't do that. I can't buy into their ideas, and I don't give a fuck, and I just can't. Because my thought is rigid. I'm not flexible, I'm not open to change, I don't like fascism, and they can't spend enough money to make me like it, or make me give a shit, or make me care about their stupid fucking ideas. And, that's good. It's good that I have rigid thought, because I really am, as far as I'm aware, more immune to brainwashing, manipulation, and coercion than a lot of people. Much more, actually. I think that's actually a good thing. Call me wild, but I think it is. I think there are many benefits to it, and yeah, that's just the idea, I guess.